You know, when you look on Google Finance and you look up anybody's stock price, UPS stock price, and you look in the right-hand column, there's a CDP score there. Mm-hmm. So it's getting down to the dinner table.
Well, this year, I don't know if this year or not, but certainly recently, and we heard about that at the NYSE event in January, Bloomberg has started posting sustainability report-based data on its terminals, so that certainly is legitimating, expanding, sharing information that was not as easily available before. But you said something that's very provocative, I think, that the relationship between what you're reporting in your reports and accounting, because I think there is a premise that there is a conflict between between accountants and sustainability accountability that cannot be bridged by, let's say, numbers or something like that. Can you talk more about that? Because I think that's really gets at the core of this correlation that's being made here between shareholder value, transparency, GRI, and jobs, because there is some bridge between this accountability and the way things are accounted for by accountants, which in the end up in her shop in terms of how companies are judged, and we're going to get to her in a second.
So the assurance process.
The assurance process and the relationship between that and the language of accounting, which kind of dominates most of what we talk about.
So the assurance process kind of brings that conversation closer to home. Mm-hmm. So from an internal standpoint, now you have a lever. Nobody probably loves their auditor, but the audit process has a purpose. Actually, we welcome and encourage the assurance process.
Well, let's check on. Does anybody here love their auditor? I mean, just give you a chance, just in case. Well, there's somebody there.
So what happens is now you have a structure. Everybody knows what auditors are and what they do, and so now you have to audit your results. So you just can't put anything you want in a sustainability report. You have to have a track. You have to have methodology. And it's open to be discussed, and you have to prove out things if you're going to get a letter of assurance for your sustainability report. So that's one piece of it. There's an education piece as you adapt to a standard. GRI does a GRI check, and so they take a look at your sustainability report and see if you have the proper management approaches. So what happens is it becomes an education process. And to a greater extent than most people think, the audit process, the GRI process, the CDP process, there are similarities between them, and they actually have the boundaries cross, mm-hmm. and so it brings you up together. Now there are differences. ClimateCounts.org. They're an organization that looks at what's in the public domain. They make a rendering and they give you the score. A couple of years ago, we got a score from them. We were the lowest on the poll on that score. Now you can either get mad or you can get better.
Or get even.
Yeah. And we looked at that, and there were some things that we could talk about. We did them. We just didn't talk about them well. And there were probably some things that they didn't understand as well as they could. And so we had a conversation. So in 1 year, we went up 26 points and went from the bottom to the top. The same goes for CDP or anyone else. By having a conversation, and sometimes you need accounting expertise to help you wade through this, you can begin to understand things in different terms, because the questions and how they're answered is a critical part of this. Mm-hmm. You can't answer questions any way you want to. There's a reason why the questions are structured that way. And if you think about the perspective of that, it makes you better.
So basically, we all do physicals, we all do medical events, and when you go to the doctor, they ask you to fill in a form and basically tell you how you're feeling so they can judge your health. In a way, what you're saying is that GRI plays a similar role to your sense of corporate health, because you kind of have to self-declare and find where you are with regard to some of your aspirations, and also test that in the marketplace.
Well, GRI, if you just eat hot dogs for lunch, GRI has a standard that you have to disclose that, right?
How many hot dogs?
And so
right.
There's probably a correlation between your cholesterol level and that activity. Mm-hmm. So what it does is it gives you a structure, a very good structure, to have a holistic approach. And so you can't do it with a couple guys in a corner. It has to be a cross-functional conversation. Management teams need to be involved. You know, a whole host of functions need to be involved, and you have to have conversations. You know, most of the conversations are not as comfortable as they could be, but that's really what sustainability is, right? I mean, if it's a comfortable conversation, then maybe you're not talking about sustainability. And
Well, key word, conversation. We've heard a lot. Let me move on, because we have limited time, to Michelle. Michelle is in, I guess, just like I'm in the wholesale business, because we deal with many companies. Ernst is in the wholesale business, deal with many companies. You're in the wholesale business, you deal with many, many companies. And from where you sit, how does this discussion sound? And I have to tell you a story in relation to that, because about, I guess, 5 or 6 years ago, there was a meeting convened at the UN Compact in New York of the world's stock exchanges. I was there, I was the host then. And I remember that there had been an effort to try and get the New York Stock Exchange to come, and they didn't come. We got people from Indonesia, from Italy, from the Deutsche Börse, from Shanghai, from Italy, from all over, but the missing stock exchange was NYSE. What has happened since then that you're now here at this platform and that you were there in January?
Well, I think a couple of different things are happening. I think what we're seeing is, and you, I think, raised it with the why, what's the return on doing this? And what we're seeing is that there is a lot more return on doing it than there's ever been before. Investors care, customers care, and that's customers, whether we're talking about consumers or whether we're talking about B2B customers. Customers care. Employees care. We even see the Harvard study that showed that employees will take $11,000 less in salary to work for a responsible company. So you can really quantify the ways in which both your reputation, your brand, but also real numbers around savings around salaries on both sides of the ledger. You're really seeing greater value placed on these types of issues, I think, across the board by companies. And I also think you're seeing it talked about in a much more, I'm a Dr. Seuss fan, so I made up a word for this one.
Great person.
Businessification of corporate responsibility or sustainability. Now, it's not going to make it into a Dr. Seuss book, probably. But
we need one on sustainability, actually. That could probably change the whole generation.
Absolutely. But I think that's really what we're seeing. We're seeing this. It's no longer a fluffy, nice-to-have thing that's over in the corner and you kind of do it if you want to. It's really done right, I think, at the core of business strategy and changing the way that companies are thinking about their business strategy. And so I think it's now become part of the strategy conversation.
Ernst, is quantification and reporting on performance more integral to the GRI guidelines now or prospectively?
I think, well, sustainability reporting is, by nature, has a forward-looking component in it. And what you see, if you look at the earlier generations of the GRI guidelines to what's in the G3 and what we're also now working on the G4, is that we're trying to make a shift from early generation reporting on commitments to more reporting on, so what are the results, what effects are you having, and how can we make these most transparent? Where quantification is possible, we will certainly adopt quantification, but it's also in the nature of this kind of information that not everything is quantifiable, and that sometimes quantification might mean that you lose the actual meaning of the information. So it's a fine balance to strike.
And then how does that affect the way the NYSE looks at its role as a market maker in a certain way? Because you are positioned as the place where those seeking capital get capital, but a lot of what's being redefined as necessary capital has to do with some of these intangible elements that are not quantifiable and cannot be expressed as a number that goes into the algorithms that these guys use in these little machines.
Well, I think a couple of things are happening that are relevant there. First, I think what we're seeing is more of and I think this is a trend that's going to continue, a mainstreaming of sustainability. So it's not just the SRIs who are considering these things anymore, right? It's on the Bloomberg terminal. It's conventional investors who are thinking about these types of issues. And so I think we're seeing a much more broad-based focus on these issues that's good for all of us and good for this field. And I think as we see that more broad-based focus, look, we still don't necessarily have the right metrics for all of this. I think that's one of the challenges that this field faces, is getting those metrics right. Whether they are quantifiable by numbers or quantifiable in other ways, but getting those numbers right, getting the apples to apples comparison that something like the GRI enables across companies and within sectors, because there's obviously different ways that you think about this in different sectors. So I think we've come a long way in that type of analysis. There are still pieces that we're learning and can do better on.
What's the distance between the Shanghai Exchange, or I guess the Singapore Exchange, requiring companies that list there to do sustainability reports, and whatever the listing requirements are for the NYSE? Is that anything that can ever happen in New York?
Well, I think you have to look at where the companies are. If you look at companies in Asia, a lot more of them are reporting and have been reporting for a lot longer. Mm-hmm. In the US, the percentage of companies that actually report and the length of time which they have been reporting is much lower. So I think we are on a trajectory, but what I actually think is going to perhaps even overtake that trajectory is, as these topics get more integrated into basic core corporate strategy, the materiality standard becomes more and more relevant to these topics. So if this is part of your core corporate strategy, you can call it integrated reporting, you can call it whatever you want, you're required to report on what's material. So I think we have a convergence coming as these become more of the core of what you do and of your business. It converges into materiality.
Does the NYSE see part of its role in exposing companies to this eventuality as part of what you do in terms of I don't know. I don't know enough about what you do day to day.
Yeah, no, so I would say I think we see our role as really, at this point, certainly more of a carrot than a stick, if you will. Mm-hmm. So part of what we do, one of our core corporate strategies, is that we have a group of companies that includes, and you can measure this on many, many different parameters for sustainability, but the world's leading companies for sustainability. Any of the metrics you want to take, DJSI, CDP, it ends up being about 90% of the leadership lists are companies that are part of the NYSE or Euronext family. And so we see with that community of companies a role for us to play around bringing together companies that are exercising best practices, sharing those best practices, and having conversations like these, as we did earlier this year at the exchange, that help our companies to move forward wherever they are on that journey themselves, and providing them with tools, providing them with guidance, providing them with best practices, and really assistance at this point in moving forward from wherever they are toward more sustainability reporting.
So you've created basically a new role for the exchange as a convener of your own members around a topic that is of interest to them, and because they are your members, you want to help them.
Exactly.
And that puts you in the very active question of, answering this question, how does this generate shareholder value? Because you are the temple of shareholder value. We know that, right? You go in there, there's a church of the priests, that's the shareholder value. And of course, the consequence of that is jobs, and the vehicle of that is transparency. So that's quite a leap from not even attending this UN Compact meeting some 6 years ago. Okay, so we have a good sense of the fact that where the financial arena is meeting the sustainability one, there is more self-generated activity. I don't think anybody called you guys to do that. You perceived something in the marketplace and you responded. UPS, because you guys are engineers, you created a formula, and the formula told you to do this, and you did it, or whatever it was, but something prompted you, in again, your assessment of the marketplace, to take some action, and you felt basically rewarded for that by the recognition you have received, and also in your own way, you feel much better about that, and you have more control about that. GRI is looking to kind of match up with these two streams in a way that will lend more credibility and more weight, so that the shared reality that we all have in this field is commonly held. So with that as an overview of what we've discussed here, I wonder if there's any auditor who has a question in the audience, or any other issue that has arisen. We can't see you too, I can see better now, that we have not raised, that we ought to raise, either in answering this question or in reframing it. We have just about 3 or 4 minutes left. Please don't be shy. Shy people do not get fed. Yes, sir. Hear you well, thank you.
How do you work ethics into this kind of a situation? Because it does seem to me that companies that could score very high on all of these standards and yet hit the skids because of a failure in ethics. Is there any way that you talked, Michelle, about getting metrics around some of these things we haven't yet gotten metrics about? Is there any effort in trying to do that, and any understanding of how that might happen? Is it part of your remit?
Yeah, I mean, I think ethics is obviously part of this conversation. If you look at kind of who we are and what we've done for over 200 years, it's set standards around good governance, around transparency, around kind of all of the elements of ethics. And in fact, we're having an event on Wednesday with the world's most ethical companies. So that same sort of convening role, I think these two things converge for sure, but that same sort of convening role around specifically ethics, compliance, and good governance is something that we do hand in hand with our corporate responsibility work.
And if I may add something, ethics you can also make more transparent and less of a mystical question. In a report, a company can express what its basic principles, its fundamental principles are. It can also report what actions it can undertake or is undertaking with regards to these principles. And many of these principles will have to do with the question of what's the right thing to do. The right thing to do with regards to our relation with the environment and with society. And transparency helps there. Transparency helps to establish a good relationship with stakeholders, with the users of information, with clients, employees, and with investors and customers. It in the end then also helps again to drive value in the business. 80% at this moment on average of companies' values is made up of other things than physical assets and financial assets. There are these elements of trust, trust vested in the company, and that is maybe an amorphous concept that has many, many dimensions. And one of the things that we're trying to achieve with this kind of reporting is get more of a handle on how or what drives this trust and how is it made up.
Okay, it seems.
I have one more there, David.
Okay, somebody behind the light there. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I just have a question about full cost accounting, because I'm hearing unbelievably powerful initiatives and changes, but then when I hear about statistics like what's happening in Copenhagen, and I just actually came back from there, there's a reason why you get over 93% of all companies taking these types of initiatives in Denmark, but not in the United States. And if we just look at the news that happened this morning, BP has just filed to continue drilling in the Gulf. Which I would imagine if there was such a thing as full cost accounting, they probably wouldn't be able to do that. And I can't help but wonder where GRI and all of your work fits into the future when there may potentially be penalizations for operating in a way that is unethical or environmentally destructive.
What we need is to get a more informed discussion, and that's also why dialogue directly between a company and its different kind of stakeholders, but dialogue also more in society about the kind of issues that you're referring to is made possible, and where this is more information or more fact-based. And that is where GRI-based accounting or sustainability reporting can make a difference, whether it goes to the area of full cost reporting is then you can discuss it what exactly is in that concept, but overall what we need to get to is to speak in jargon and in technical terms, the internalization of many facets that are currently in the category of externalities. And only when we have a more integrated and complete picture of how companies operate, the often difficult trade-offs and decisions that need to be made to ensure that the company continues to be a going concern, that it can operate and is competitive in the near future, but that at the same time factors in the many social and environmental considerations. In order to do that, you do need to come to a more integrated way of reporting. That's what integrated reporting in the end is about. Sustainability reporting is a pathway through that. There is no way that you can come to an integrated report if you don't have experience in the area of sustainability reporting. And when that reporting is out there, where that information becomes more of a common practice, then we're all better equipped to have discussions. Because in the end, I would caution us to all say, so BP is the one that has the big problems, and do they run a risk? Or is it TEPCO in Japan? In the end, these are companies that serve the kind of economy that we all buy into, that we're all beneficiaries and part of. And we can only change it all together. And that we can only do on the basis of informed discussions. And that is the powerful potential that is there in sustainability reporting, potential that many companies have discovered. There is no company that wouldn't tell the story like Steve has just also told, that when you start this kind of reporting, that many opportunities for new value generation are discovered, new dimensions of risk management are discovered. But you need to take it wider too. It is in the end about our whole economy. We need to figure out what do we need, what do we want, what do we tolerate, what do we expect of the many companies that currently serve our economy. And there clearly the goalposts are shifting. They need to be clear, and we need to articulate those in new terms, new conditions, and with new information. And that's where we're starting with sustainability reporting. Last pitch. Currently, yeah, growing number of companies are reporting. But as we've just seen in the sample here in this room, it isn't common yet. And yet we would all be served if this was a common practice. There's one thing we can commit to is, let's start to look at the facts. Let's all do that, and let's have then an informed conversation. Then we can get so much further.
Well, to paraphrase Peanuts, I guess, we have seen the company, and the company is us. So as our panelists are indicating, if we want to go in a certain direction, we have to talk about it and agree on that direction and start walking that direction. Of course, part of that's already happened because you are at the Javits Center. You have to want to come here. This is on the West 34th Street. It's hard to get to, you know. So you have to want to get here. And getting to sustainability is probably easier than getting to the Javits Center. So thank you for making it this far and for participating with us in this discussion. Appreciate your attendance and attention. And I guess what I would give you all is to not undervalue the value of conversation. I mean, we all get stuck in numbers and so on. I'm not anti-number, but I just think that the priesthood of numbers is a false religion. And that particularly in the area where you have some new social movements such as the pull on companies to perform more for society and more for the world while doing better for shareholders and so on, can lead us in the wrong direction if you're only dealing with things that have nothing to do with principles and values that we actually live for as opposed to things that we work for. Hopefully we can work for and live for the same thing, and that's part of the purpose of this whole meeting. So thank you very much for being with us. Thank you, Ernst, Steve, and Michelle.